and I'm selling to you, and I've uncovered that you have a $100,000 headache, my $10,000 aspirin might be a really good deal for you. But if you've got a $100,000 headache and I'm trying to sell you a $1 million program, you're going to probably say, wait a second, that $1 million might not be worth it to me. So understanding how that individual buyer, even if I'm selling to you as a business, you're still a person, and how that person will make that decision, is it worth it?
You're listening to the B2B Revenue Executive Experience, a podcast dedicated to helping executives train their sales and marketing teams to optimize growth. Whether you're looking for techniques and strategies or tools and resources, you've come to the right place. Let's accelerate your growth in 3, 2, 1.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the B2B Revenue Executive Experience. I'm your host, Cory, and today we're joined by Julie Thomas. She is a noted author, speaker, and the president and CEO of ValueSelling Associates. She works with revenue leaders to help them achieve results they never thought possible. She also leads Growist, a value selling sub-brand that empowers small businesses with proven sales frameworks. As a former Gartner executive, Julie's long-standing industry leadership has earned value selling top awards as a preeminent sales training service provider to mid-size and enterprise companies. Her latest book, The Power of Value Selling, the Gold Standard to Drive Revenue and Create Customers for Life, is a bestseller that has earned numerous awards. Julie, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Cory. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to get into this. We've got a lot of good stuff to talk through. And obviously, a lot of our core listeners are going to be familiar with value selling and everything that we do. But a lot of people might not be as familiar with Growist. So I'm excited to talk through that and get the latest update from you.
Excellent. Look forward to sharing that with you.
Okay. So let's start by helping everyone just get to know you a little bit more on a personal level. And, looking back at your sales career, you've had a storied rise through the ranks, right? From sales leadership, multiple accolades along the way. Thinking back to those early days at Gartner and then fast forward to leading value selling, what sparked your passion for sales?
It's kind of interesting how I ended up in sales kind of accidentally, but on purpose, if you will. So my father was a salesman. So I grew up knowing what he did. Very different type of sales than I do. He sold corrugated boxes, but he traveled a lot. And so I grew up knowing what that was about, what at least his role was about. My degree, though, was in business and finance. And it was because of my degree being in finance that I ended up in a job at Gartner. It was Gartner Group at the time, early on in my career, in a accounting-like role. I was actually reporting into the sales team, but I was in what they called sales support and billing. So we were doing all of the order entry for all the orders that came in. And as part of that, I was seeing commissions, what commissions looked like for sales reps. And because I was part of the sales organization, I was also becoming friends with a number of the people in the sales organization. And I realized I could do what they did. So I literally started kind of lobbying to our VP of sales at the time. His name was Rick. And every time I'd see him in the hallway or pass him during the day, I'd say, I think I can be your next selling rep, sales rep. And 6 months in, he gave me a shot and moved me into what would now be kind of considered an inside customer success type sales role. So I was partnered with an account executive, and I was responsible for making sure they were using the products and services they bought from Gartner at the time, that they renewed the products and services that they bought from Gartner at the time, and also had a small quota for upsell. So it was really kind of what now you'd probably call a customer success or an account manager type role. And I became the top performing account representative very quickly. And then within a year was promoted to an outside account executive and took over a number of our largest accounts that the company had at the time up in the Boston area. So it was really fun to get into sales.
Yeah, and it's quite a story too. There are two big jumps that I'd love to learn more about, because today you see some people, the customer success versus sales. There's some people that are really locked into customer success, don't think of themselves as salespeople. And for the people that are looking to make that jump, that's a hard jump. But you went from accounting to customer success to then, one of the hot AEs at Gartner there. So what was that transition like? Because I think a lot of people think, you're either a seller or you're not, but it seems like you quickly learned those skills and put them into practice.
Well, absolutely. So a couple of things. At Gartner at the time, they had kind of two sales roles. One was called the account representative, and that was kind of this account manager, customer success type manager. We were not out getting new logos. We were partnered with people that were out getting new logos, but we were kind of farming the base, if you will. We were the farmer side, but it was a little bit more junior role. Our career path was to be an account executive. So that was a career path that was at my disposal. Because I worked as an account rep, I was partnered with an account executive. I became that account executive's third arm. I latched myself onto that person to learn everything I could about what she was doing out making the sales calls. And every time I had an opportunity to go work with her, travel with her, go to a meeting with her, watch her present, all of that stuff, I took advantage of every opportunity. And I became like a little puppet. I was a sponge trying to learn everything. I didn't even understand half of the technology that we were selling information and research on, but I knew enough to be dangerous. But I think it was my willingness and excitement to really learn and embrace and just say yes to every opportunity that came across my path that led me to great success as well.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic advice for people as well, because we talk a lot about, learning to say no, learning to prioritize. We don't really talk about learning to say yes to opportunity and growth.
I said yes to everything. And I think that was a couple of reasons why I was promoted so often. I was willing to relocate. I was willing to take the territory that hadn't performed well, that people were afraid of. And I said, I'll do it. I'll take it. And that territory ended up being a very high performing territory once I got into it and started working it. But people had turned down the opportunity to move to Boston, if you will, to take over the territory that I took over. And I embraced it and went and just, was able to crush my quota that year. So saying yes provided me more opportunities. The same thing happened when I moved into management. I said yes to an opportunity that required me to relocate. And there were other people that said no to that same opportunity. And because at one point in my career at Gartner, I think I had been relocated 4 times in 6 or 7 years. I went to the Bay Area. I came back to Boston. Then I moved down to Connecticut. Then I moved back to Chicago. Then I moved back to Connecticut again. And it was all opportunities that allowed me to advance my career.
And so obviously you've had a lot of success. And like you said, you were like a sponge, right? You're soaking up everything you could, saying yes to every opportunity, learning on the fly. But so what would you say to those people, or maybe a better way to put this is, why does that misconception still exist that sales is something that you can't learn, that you can't absorb and those skills and get better at?
I don't know, because sales is for sure a skill set based profession, and it's just communication skills. And we all know that communication skills can be learned, whether it's how you engage to communicate, how you present to communicate, and how you listen. Are all things that can be learned. And I still do. I am a professional development junkie. I love to read. Now we've got podcasts and all these other vehicles to stay current and listen to. I think it's that love of learning that leads to opportunities opening up as well and staying relevant. But sales for sure is a skill set that can be learned. I think there was a misconception at one point that said, you have to be extroverted and you have to have, this big personality to be in sales. And And for sure, there are people like that. But I know plenty of very successful salespeople that are much more introverted and much more introspective in how they approach their work. And they're not the life of the party type personality that I think a lot of people associate with salespeople. You do have to want to be with people in the B2B sales world. Like, you're not selling, you're selling to people, and people buy from people. So you have to have those skills to get in front of people. But you don't have to be the life of the party to be a successful sales rep.
Yep, I completely agree. I've seen it too. And I think it goes back to what you were saying about listening, right? That person that you think of as the life of the party, that larger than life character coming in, at least when I picture them, I'm thinking about someone who's doing a lot more talking than they are listening. And I think that's what a lot of people, particularly entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, outside the sales profession that find themselves selling, I think that's how they think of it. So maybe you could talk a little bit more about unpacking that mindset shift from talking, from pushing products to actually truly listening, and how that transformed your sales conversations.
Well, absolutely. When I first started in sales, you assume that, I've got to get really good at presenting. I've got to get really good at pitching, if you will, and know the talk track. And it's all about what I say. And you quickly realize that, yes, what you say is important, but more important than that is what the customer says. And it's more important to learn how to facilitate buying than it is to force selling, if you will. So it's kind of a crazy flip-flop approach to selling. It's the questions I ask and how I prepare to engage you, especially early on in a sales cycle, is really, really critical. And what I learned over the years is that, and this leads to these entrepreneurs that we're now working with. The entrepreneur is an entrepreneur because they're good at whatever their business is. I'm working with people that have companies that sell security systems, or coaches, or consultants in their own right, to people that have developed a product. One of the entrepreneurs I'm working with is a lawn care company in the Midwest, and she's developed eco-friendly products and fertilizers that won't hurt your pet or your kid if you put them on the lawn that they're have spread these products on, etc. And they're where they're at in their entrepreneur journey because they're good at what they do. And they're very good at telling you what they do. But what they don't know is how to engage to see if you might need it. They're really good at telling you they're good. If I'm an attorney, I'm also responsible for getting new customers or new clients into that organization. And I'm really good at telling you about my successful track record as an attorney, but I might not be as good about understanding your point of view of why you might need an attorney. So we're finding tremendous success with these entrepreneurs. And they've all come to me saying, I don't like sales because I'm so uncomfortable with it. And the reality is no one's ever taught them how to sell. So that's why they're uncomfortable. It's just a foreign skill set for them. But if you are an entrepreneur, you might call yourself the CEO of your company. But the reality is, as an entrepreneur, CEO stands for Chief Everything Officer. And you're also the Chief Revenue Officer and the Chief Marketing Officer, and then often the product itself. And they're coming to learn that there's a specific process, there's an approach, there's a skill set and a tool set that they can master and make those conversations much more comfortable for them and better outcomes for both them and their customers.
And it sounds like what you're describing is definitely more of a consultative based approach. I think you mentioned, Julie, that really it's about facilitating the buyer's process.
Yeah.
And I've definitely heard you say before that the natural evolution and end of a well-run sales process or well-facilitated buying process is a sale, right? That's kind of the natural conclusion to that. What would you say talking to entrepreneurs that maybe have that idea that it is more about presenting, what would be the fundamental parts or sections of a more value-based approach that they should start thinking about?
We want to know a couple of things about who we're selling to. And if you think about it from the buyer's point of view, if I'm selling to you, Cory, I want to know how you're going to answer a couple questions. The first question, and the most obvious one, is, hey, should I do business with Julie? Does she have something that I need that's a fit for me and my business? Great. I will only know that if I'm asking you questions. The second question I want to understand from you is how you would answer the question, is it worth it? So if I've uncovered and I'm selling to you and I've uncovered that you have a $100,000 headache, my $10,000 aspirin might be a really good deal for you. But if you've got a $100,000 headache and I'm trying to sell you a $1 million program, you're going to probably say, wait a second, that $1 million might not be worth it to me. So understanding how that individual buyer, even if I'm selling to you as a business, you're still a person, and how that person will make that decision of, is it worth it? And then the last two questions I really want to understand is, who else needs to be involved? Can you buy? And then when are you going to buy? And one of the really strategic aspects of value selling in our framework, as well as in Growist, is using those outcomes and the value or outcomes that we discuss that you're going to realize from doing business with me as a way to motivate you to take action sooner rather than later. So that's what we call really understanding your timeline. And as much as it's nice for the sales rep to have a timeline, I always say that's really interesting, but it's irrelevant to the buyer. They're always going to operate on their timeline. So we need to ask those. One thing that sometimes happens is sales reps and entrepreneurs are afraid to ask those questions that might not give them information that's helpful today. So, if I ask you a question about when you want to take action and you start to talk about next quarter, but I'm feeling pressured to close you this quarter, that's a disconnect. But it's important to be honest as opposed to just hopeful that you might accelerate your decision-making process. So that's a big part of what we work with. And consultative is really saying the questions I ask you are also establishing my credibility as an authority in the area, as well as helping you think through, what do you really need?
And I think that's something that is crucial, especially if you're selling to maybe a more small business to small business kind of sale, right? Like you said, people are wearing many hats. They might think they need X. And through these conversations, you can actually uncover additional needs that you might be a better fit for in some ways.
Exactly.
There's one thing I was struck by in that example, Julie. You mentioned the $10,000 aspirin being a good fit for the $100K headache, but if I'm throwing a $100K aspirin and a $100K headache, people are going to balk at that and say, let's slow down for a second, right? So when we start talking about quantifying the value, how can small businesses and entrepreneurs do that in a way that's believable? Because I think sometimes, we tend to lead with these huge ROI numbers and calculators, and on the buying side, it's kind of difficult to believe.
Yeah, well, that's because sometimes we're using these calculators and we're coming to them and telling them the ROI. And when I tell you something that you haven't been part of coming to that conclusion, if you don't believe it, all it does is create resistance. So we want to facilitate a conversation that says, hey, if we solved this problem, how would you measure that impact? And really getting into that and taking them down that path with us. And if they say, well, I think we could save this amount, but I'm not sure, then we can have a conversation about, well, what are you sure about? And what are the metrics that we could impact here? And maybe even identify additional metrics that you might be able to help build that case to build out that value proposition. But it's really about the prospect owning that ROI number in order to believe it. And for them to own it, we need to bring them on the journey with us to create it. And that's just, sometimes that takes a little bit more time to have those types of conversations. But if I just throw out, I had a client once that had these ROI calculators, and they were going to their prospects and saying, hey, we're going to save you 7,000%. The number was just astronomical. And because it was so astronomical, it was not believable. And so that ROI calculator was actually working against the prospect's success as opposed to contributing to it. And when we started teaching them how to engage that, use that calculator tool, but in a different way, conversationally with the prospect, to get them buying into every input and kind of putting them on this journey with them, it became much more effective.
And it sounds like everything sort of has its place. And it's not necessarily what the information is, but rather how you present it, or who's presenting it, as who's coming to those conclusions in the case of the prospect, right? Having an active role in that conversation when you start quantifying the value. Is there a way that people can use storytelling that kind of help them make that more rich, more engaging, a little bit more relatable?
Absolutely. Stories sell, right? Stories are memorable, and stories can often have an emotional thread that will resonate with people. So we do use stories a lot in selling. Stories are much more memorable than facts and figures. And so we have frameworks for stories that we teach both entrepreneurs and sales professionals on how to tell, how to use stories to establish credibility, how to use stories as examples that might resonate with other clients, how to use stories to make the problems or challenges that your prospect is facing seem more normal, kind of, having been there, done that type resonate with those prospects. They're really, really important.
Okay, great. So if we have someone listening right now and, they're listening to it on their walk around the block, right? They've got a call coming up in 30 minutes. What would you say for some practical, immediate steps that they can take to have more meaningful conversations right off the bat?
So I think a couple things. For any time you're preparing for a customer-facing meeting, whether it's Zoom or face-to-face or just over phone call, what is your objective of that communication? What is your objective for that time spent? And how are you going to achieve those objectives? And we often work on what are the questions I want to be prepared to ask to drive that conversation. So thinking about those questions, many sales reps that we work with know that, hey, if I want them to agree on my solution, and your solution could be a product, your solution could be a service, but just a generic, you're offering a solution to something. They know that intuitively they need to first get agreement on the problems. So you want to think about, why would someone care about your solution, and what problems would you want them to acknowledge in order for that solution to be relevant? And once I have that thing, the next most important thing is, are those problems worth solving? Because I don't care who you are or what your business is. There are certain things that just are not going to get addressed. You could walk the halls of my office and probably find some things and talk to some people and say, you know what, this is a problem in our business. And for whatever reason, it's not a priority for me to address. Maybe the payoff isn't big enough. Maybe I've got other priorities that are taking my attention, my resource, my time, my budget, etc. But we want to make sure that we're solving those problems that are worth solving. So I want to be prepared with those questions. And sometimes it's as simple as just saying, why now? Why is this a problem now that needs to be addressed? And how will this impact the organization or your company or your life moving forward? So we prepare those questions and then drive those conversations. And the other thing really is important for salespeople is active listening. So we teach a technique that we call asking confirming questions. And we force it into the conversation that says, as you and I are having this conversation, Cory, I am going to deliberately play back what I heard from you throughout that conversation in what we call a confirming question. Let me make sure I understood you. Here's what I've heard you say. Did I get it right? Can you clarify that? Would you add anything to that? And it forces me to actively listen because I am going to play it back as a technique to demonstrate that active listening to you.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense, especially when you talk about building rapport. There are lots of techniques out there like mirroring, this, that, but this seems to get more to the heart of the matter, right? You're actually using, I say, my language, playing back to me what I said, what's my priorities, putting those top of mind. Is that correct? Is that kind of how we structure this?
Absolutely. It's really important, which means I have to listen because I have traveled with sales reps and spent time with sales reps that are either talking or waiting to talk as opposed to listening. And they're just waiting for that pause so they can jump in and start talking again. And listening is such an important part of the sales process. It's what builds the relationship as well. People want to be seen and heard. And it is critical to really understand the point of view of the prospect. And if I'm talking, I'm not learning and I'm not listening. So it is important. We always say kind of jokingly, like you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth, use them proportionally. But it really is true in terms of sales.
Yeah, it definitely is. Okay, so it seems like we're primarily focused on strategic questioning, confirming what's going on, making sure we've identified the right problems and they're problems worth solving. So at what point, because I can imagine a lot of entrepreneurs are going to be listening to this and thinking like no one goes into business and builds their own solutions thinking they're not great, right? Everyone's excited to talk about their product. Everyone's excited to talk about their services, and naturally so. At what point do you kind of pull that product knowledge out of your pocket and present it, and what's the best way of doing so?
So once I've understood what problems you're trying to solve, you might not even call it a problem. It might be an opportunity, or it might be just a gap in your business, whatever it is, but I'm going to call it a problem. And what you think you're looking for. With that knowledge, I can now educate you, the products and services that I'm offering, in that context. And it allows me to tailor how I educate you based on what you've already told me you need. So at some point, obviously, I have to tell you what we do and explain, why we're different and why this is unique. But I want as much context as possible, because the biggest risk I have if I start to educate you too soon on my product is I talk about something, or I tell you about something that I think is really important, but you don't. And I give you a reason to not buy. And so without context, that puts me at risk. So I create that context. What are you trying to solve for? What do you think you need? What's important to you? What are you considering? What have you tried? Once I understand that, I can say, great, I think we have a fit here, Cory. Let me walk you through why I think this could be a really good option for you. And now I can educate you in that context.
That makes a lot of sense. The most valuable parts or features of a product or service are going to be the ones that prospects connect to, right? It's not necessarily the laundry list.
Absolutely. And I can highlight the things that you've told me you need and downplay things that if you've said, I don't really need that, then I'm not going to spend time on that. And, especially in software sales and SaaS-based sales, there's been this whole movement for the last, 5-10 years that says product-led sales. If I just can show you the product, you'll fall in love with it and buy it. And, for a while that works, but once that easy business is gone, now what? And so now you have to become more of a solution consultative approach to solve real problems, not just get a product in your hand, not just get a freemium or a demo or trial piece of software in someone's hands. We really actually need to go in and create the need and then differentiate the options.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Like PLG works, and it works if you have a really just category redefining product. And like you said, it's only going to work up until a point, right? Once all the easy business is gone, once you reach a certain point of saturation, you really have to develop a different mindset.
Absolutely.
And so going back to, obviously we have ValueSelling, we have Growist, and from looking at Growist and particularly the flagship program, Stop Selling, Start Solving, seems to really embrace that mindset shift from pushing products, the product-led growth, to solving the business problems. So can you talk a little bit about like what led you to create this program and how it helps people kind of do that mindset shift from one to the other?
Sure. So I've been involved in entrepreneur groups and small business groups for years. And learning from entrepreneurs, many of them said, I hate sales, but I know I have to do it. I feel uncomfortable. I feel like an imposter. I don't know what I'm doing. So as I started to think about it, the Value Selling Framework is a world-class program, and we are used by businesses all over the globe, from small, medium-sized businesses all the way up to enterprise organizations. I mean, we've got some clients where we've trained thousands of people in their organization over time on value selling. But I realized that the fundamental principles of our framework could be packaged in a way that would be more consumable for an entrepreneur. So in a business that's got a sales organization, they often compartmentalize different roles. Like you might have sales development reps that are out getting initial appointments. Then you might have account executives and account managers and renewal specialists. And all of those organizations or roles are split up over different people. But for an entrepreneur, they're doing it all. So we created an end-to-end program that starts with how do you identify your ideal customer, to how do you get those initial meetings, to how do you create opportunities, how do you qualify the opportunities, how do I negotiate and close those opportunities, and then how do I renew and upsell and resell if I want a customer for life. So we built a very comprehensive program for them that takes from the Value Selling Framework program almost 4 different programs and puts it into one end-to-end robust program for the entrepreneurs. And they're loving it because they're realizing they can learn how to sell. They can learn how to have what they tell me is sometimes the uncomfortable conversation by focusing on the value that they bring to their clients. Oftentimes, entrepreneurs can undervalue their time and their expertise. And one of the outcomes that I have is that when they go through this program, they will realize they can get the full value for the products and services they offer to their markets.
Yeah, I think it's so easy, right? When you're first starting out, you're just building this business, you're probably seeing a lot of red in the ledgers there, right? It's tempting to go for the easy sale. It's tempting to discount, but if you stay the course, it's hard to come back from that. And it's hard to really talk value and what you bring to people if you're constantly talking price, right?
Exactly.
So the other thing that maybe to kind of shift and ask a little bit more of a critical question, I'm thinking, if I'm an entrepreneur, that program sounds fantastic. And talking about time, it sounds like it's going to be an investment. How are you helping people kind of put those best practices that they learn going through the program from those 4 different value selling modules that have been rebuilt, how to put those practices to work immediately for them?
So the nice thing about the program that we've built is it's got both an online and an offline component. So the curriculum that we've built is very modular. It's actually 11 complete modules of content. Each one is roughly about an hour, but it includes downloadable tools, job aids, checklists, templates that you can start to put to work. So the idea is that as an entrepreneur, you can decide when you engage with that content and you can go through it at your own pace. I've got some entrepreneurs that are diving in and getting through the program very quickly. And I've got others that are taking it a little bit slower and kind of saying, okay, I'm looking at this as a full year's program and I'm doing maybe a module a month or something for the full year. But that's up to you. Then there's kind of offline program is the content's all housed in a portal that allows you to interact with me online, ask questions, get coaching, and get help through that. So I've got those entrepreneurs that are reaching out and I'm reaching out to them, and that's all online through the platform that the learning is housed on, as well as monthly coaching calls where you can ask anything. And I've got entrepreneurs that are showing up with scenarios or an opportunity, or here's an objection that I got or a question that I got that made me really uncomfortable. How can I handle that? And so it allows you to take everything that we're doing and then interact with me individually as well to get what you need from that.
That's fantastic, especially the community building and the real-time access, right? I mean, coming from the Denver, Boulder kind of tech startup scene here, I've seen how vital community is and how people really latch onto that. So it's an important component to have.
Absolutely. It's very important.
Okay. All right. We have 2 questions as we come toward the end of the podcast here that we ask every guest. And the first is, Julie, we're recording this in March of 2025. So look out 5 years into the future, 2030. What's a shift coming for the sales profession, particularly the B2B side of things, that we don't see coming?
Well, I think, AI is the big shift that everybody's talking about today. And AI is impacting everything in the business to business world. It's making us much more efficient. I can do research faster. I can create content faster. I can write faster. All of those things that AI can help me on the efficiency. But I think where it's lacking is on the effectiveness. So what we see happening as AI takes over and automates some of these mundane tasks, in 5 years, sales reps are not going to be doing any data entry. They're not going to be doing any research. They still need to understand what those customers do, but it's going to be fed to them in a very different way, and we're going to interact. And I think AI is going to start to impact how people buy. So it'll be very interesting. Now, our customers, I don't think the salespeople are going to be obsolete, but I do think their role as a consultant is going to change greatly. The salesperson has to add insight and has to add value to the process. Otherwise, I don't need a salesperson anymore. So I'm not sure I've got even the crystal ball on what will it be like in 2030, but it will be completely different. And one thing I think we are learning from AI is the pace of change has accelerated so much. And sales reps are going to have to continue to learn, continue to innovate, and to be relevant in today's world and tomorrow's.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay. Final question is, as an entrepreneur yourself, looking back maybe 5-10 years in the past, what's some advice you'd wish that you could have given your younger self?
There's been times where I've been afraid to make a decision and it's held me back a little bit. So I think it is just make a decision and execute. We started this out by saying my career really flourished early on because I said yes to opportunities. I think as a leader and an entrepreneur, one of the things that we have to do, we make decisions. I make decisions all day long. And making them and then focusing on executing them, I think, is where we all can get better. And sometimes it's easier to not make a decision But I think just making decisions and then focusing on execution is where I would change maybe the speed of some of those decisions that I've made.
Tremendous advice. Okay. And if people want to learn more about you, learn more about Growist, where should they go?
Absolutely. So I am not hard to find on LinkedIn, Julie Thomas, or if you're interested in value selling, go to valueselling.com. And our Growist product is on growist.com. So growist.com. And you will find all kinds of information about that solopreneur or individual sales rep product.
Awesome. Well, Julie, thank you so much for joining us on the show. It's been great to talk to you.
Thanks, Cory. I appreciate the opportunity.
You've been listening to the B2B Revenue Executive Experience. To ensure that you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show in iTunes or your favorite podcast player. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.